So can I just, on behalf of Jared and myself, welcome everybody to tonight's session. Thank you so much for joining us for a quick, impactful 45 minutes tonight here in Melbourne, in early morning in the Netherlands, and wherever you are in the world or wherever you are in Australia. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, Jared and I are absolutely passionate about this work. We love education, we love teaching, and we've just written our first book together called 10 Things Schools Get Wrong, which is #1 on a few Amazon charts, which is exciting. So we're very grateful for all of the support from you guys. It's unreal. And we're loving the conversations that this is causing. And we're very, very grateful for your openness and willingness to be part of our journey, to kind of hear our messages, to engage with us. And so thank you so much for joining us again tonight. And so Jared and I met on the conference scene a couple of years ago, where Jared was talking about learning science and I was talking about wellbeing science. And we had a few discussions / arguments and ended up over a beer deciding to write a book about all of this stuff, about cutting edge learning science, cutting edge wellbeing science, and how we can help really shake up education as we develop a better way, an even better way maybe, of moving forward.
And tonight we're going to be right in David's wheelhouse. So I actually love this. So his whole background, tonight we're talking about well-being and mindset, and we're drawing on the last decade of experience you have working specifically with well-being in this sphere. So tonight I'm really pumped. You're gonna hear, I consider this spotlight on David night, because a lot of really good ideas we're gonna hear from the guy who's been doing this more than anyone else I know. So pumped to kick off tonight.
Let's launch into this exploration of mindset theory, and particularly everything that I've learned over the last 10 years of working with over 1,000 schools around the world. What we've really learned about not only mindset, but also well-being science more broadly. And the way I'd like to introduce this is by sharing 3 of the biggest mistakes, if you like, that we've learned from as a field of well-being science, positive education. Here are 3 of the biggest mistakes kind of that the field has made, and therefore 3 of the biggest lessons that we've learned over the last 10 years. Now, the interesting thing, well, personally, I think it's interesting anyway for me to share with you these lessons learned. But the really interesting thing that Jared and I noticed is that these mistakes that we made, that I'm going to honestly share with you tonight, are actually 3 mistakes that mindset, or researchers in mindset, or people interpreting mindset theory have also made. And Jared's going to draw the link for us between the mistakes we've made in positive education, wellbeing science, and the mistakes that mindset has made as well in schools. So here's #1. I wonder if you can guess what #1 is. Here's the kind of the image that represents maybe the biggest mistake we've made in wellbeing science in schools. Don't know if you can guess, but the answer here, or the mistake we made, is this. The lesson learned is this. We need to measure wellbeing, but we need to measure very, very carefully when we do this. There's a couple of reasons why we can't, what the lessons we've learned. Firstly, it's crucial to take baseline measurement, which was something that we didn't do 10 years ago, actually, at Geelong Grammar School, the first school in the world to really implement a whole school approach to wellbeing science in this way. We didn't take baseline data, so that was a mistake. So we should have done that. But then also we were a little bit, I think, not careful enough with why we were measuring. Like, why are we collecting all this data? Also, what are we going to do with it when we collect thousands and thousands of pieces of data? How are we going to respond in a really precise, high fidelity, agile way? Do we really know? Have we planned that? Thirdly, what are we actually measuring? Like, are we really measuring what we think we're measuring? Like, when I ask a student, when we give a student a survey, a year 8 student, 8th grade student, we say to that student, tell me how connected you feel to your family or to your friends, right? Is that a good question to ask? Is that actually measuring connectedness, or is that really measuring what the child thinks they should be saying? Is there social desirability bias? Can a year 8 kid, can a 12-year-old boy actually genuinely interpret his own subjective sense of connectedness? Can he even understand the language of that question correctly? What we really found is that self-report subjective wellbeing data can be valuable in helping us paint a picture. But the data we collect we have to be very careful not to misuse the data. We have to be very careful about what we think we're measuring versus what we're actually measuring. And with that year 8 boy, when we ask the question about connectedness, I'll tell you what we're not measuring. We're not actually measuring connectedness. At best, what we're measuring is what the boy thinks he senses as connectedness and what he should put down on the piece of paper, right? At best, we're not directly measuring connectedness. It's what scientists call a proxy measure, right? We're asking the boy to read a question and kind of subjectively interpret it, not be affected by biases, write an accurate answer down. But the problem, I think, with a lot of wellbeing science, including myself, I've fallen into this trap, and we have it in the work we've been doing sometimes, is that we think we're measuring stress levels or connectedness, when actually it's a distant kind of proxy measure that may or may not be accurate. So the first lesson we learned about data is collect it very prudently, but be very careful and understand its limitations. Jared?
And I want to jump in and say there's nothing wrong with a proxy. Pretty much everything we do in psychology and in education is a proxy. Because if you think about it, we work in a cognitive field. Thinking, learning, change, cognition happens in here. When was the last time any of y'all saw in here with your kids? Like I pray you guys spend the rest of your career never seeing one of your kids' brains. Otherwise, that's going to be a bad day on the playground. We don't have access to the actual measure. So all of what we do is we use behaviors as proxies for the thing we want. We'll never know if a kid truly understands anything. I don't know if my wife understands anything, even though I spend every day with her. All I know is that people who tend to understand X typically show these behaviors, and we use that as a proxy. So this isn't to say that proxies are bad. They're highly necessary and efficient. It's just always be cognizant never to mistake the measure for the event. Now, when we're talking, let's make this now specific with mindset. So where mindset started, and this was before Dweck became Dweck. So this is back in the late 90s. Mindset, that word didn't even exist. And by the way, I should give a disclaimer before we kick off. Anyone who knows me knows I am not the biggest fan of mindset, the work that's gone into it. So I'm pretty harsh on it, but for good reason. It's gotten massive. So anytime anything gets this big, it's important to see the reality behind it. Is it standing on solid ground or just living on sand? So Dweck is just doing research in her measure. Yeah.
And if you just very briefly, for those people who may be a little bit less familiar with the theory, just very briefly, maybe you're about to as well, just what is the theory?
Oh, so you've got two mindset. Before it was mindset, it's all still one theory, is that people have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset, right? Growth mindset, people believe that skills, abilities, intelligence can be changed and things happen through work and effort. Fixed mindset, people believe, nope, you kind of come out with what you got. Skills, abilities, talents, you're inborn with them. And life is just about unraveling the scroll and seeing what you got on your lottery ticket. Oh, looks like I'm good at this, bad at this, cool. So fixed versus growth. Before the word mindset even came out, Dweck was just exploring what was called incremental intelligence theory. Same thing in a much uglier scientific term. And she was looking at the impact of that theory on response to errors and mistakes. That's it. If a kid screws up, are they more likely to keep going with that error if they have a growth mindset, incremental theory, or a fixed mindset? That was all she cared about. But after her first bit of research, really weird things started happening, where even though she was just measuring response to error, do you continue? How long do you continue? Do you look frustrated? That somehow morphed into learning. And people started talking about, hey, growth mindset can improve learning. Now I can see where that bridge was drawn, right? The more you embrace errors, the more you should learn. Technically, like that sounds good, but that was never the data we ever collected at the beginning. Unfortunately, Dweck started taking that to heart, and she started to really kind of play with this and started talking more and more about learning. She then spent the next chunk of her career just looking at correlation between mindset and academic outcomes, mindset, academic outcomes. And what she found is this: the correlation between mindset and academic outcomes and I wrote it down just because I don't want to screw it up, in primary year students is 0.19, so not huge, but there. In secondary students, 0.15, and in tertiary students, so kids at university college, 0.02, not a correlation at all. But who cares, right? This is correlation, not causation. We've all heard this. Anything can correlate with anything. It doesn't mean the two are actually linked or one is driving the other. So even though she's coming out with all this correlation data saying, hey, mindset is correlated, maybe not as much as we thought, but it's there. Now she had to say, does it actually impact? Does it actually change learning? And then she has to go in the final chunk of her career was spent trying to change interventions to change people's mindset. If I take you from fixed to growth, does that improve your learning? And from all of that research that demonstrates that, yep, I'm going to intervene, I'm going to change your mindset from fixed to growth, what impact does that have on learning? The answer is 0.02. And that 0.02 is not significant, which means it is 0.00. When you actually change somebody's mindset and then measure their learning academic achievement afterwards, we see no difference than before that mindset intervention. This is what we mean by being specific with your measurement. It seems like mindset can improve learning when we're looking at error response, when we're looking at correlation, but as soon as we measure the thing we really care about, we start to see the truth that, might not have the impact we all once thought it did. Now, that is the issue of measurement specifically with mindset. And now I'm going to hand it. So we're going to keep digging into mindset, but let's now pull that camera back out. Let's get broad again and look at another general well-being principle.
Here's the second mistake, or second lesson learned, if you like, that is relevant to well-being science in schools, but also relevant to mindset. And it's here that professional learning is highly valuable in education, in schools, highly valuable, but it's also very, very limited. And what we've seen at Geelong Grammar School, but also at schools we've worked with all around the world, is that professional learning has the capacity to empower, inspire teachers to open up possibilities to things that they may not even knew existed. Like back in 2005, 6, 7, when we were first exploring the field of positive psychology, no one had heard of mindset theory, let alone grits or flow theory, like these amazing concepts that really blow my mind still today. Well, there are elements of positive psychology that I just would never have kind of read myself. And teachers are busy. I was a teacher for 15 years. I work every day in a school. I understand the busyness. And I think more than ever, we're busier, more stretched, more stressed than ever. I think we're making more choices than ever before because of technology and resources that are available to us and possibilities. Teachers are unable to thoroughly scan the research literature to identify emerging theories and trends in education. There is no way they can do that, as well as being a brilliant classroom educator. And that's where professional learning has the role of opening the eyes of a teacher to new possibilities, to to new exciting tools that are available, to new ways of doing things, to new pedagogy, to new technologies, and professional learning, that's what it's there for. And that's where, at its best, that's what it does. But it is highly limited as well, because some of you may have had Jared Cooney Horvath, my co-author and friend, come to your school to present as a professional learning experience. And Jared, I can tell you firsthand, if you haven't seen Jared, is a brilliant teacher. He's a brilliant lecturer. He's a brilliant professional development person to have in your school, but you'll only have him for an hour or a day. And he's got 4 decades of knowledge inside his brain, an immense level of understanding, thousands of research papers, a PhD, work from Harvard. There's no way that, as good as Jared is, that he can even download a tiny fraction of his knowledge to you in a professional learning session. All Jared can do is distill kind of the most important elements and try to give you a superficial inspiration, a superficial nugget to you that somehow opens your eyes to something new. Now, that's at its best. That's what professional learning can do. The problem we found, and we continue to find in positive education, wellbeing science, is that as we do our work with schools around the world and support governments, United Nations, the work we're doing, sometimes people overinflate the impact that professional learning can have. Sometimes we watch someone like Jared present and we think, wow, now I know everything about learning science. Sometimes people watch me present and they go, wow, I know everything about gratitude and flow. And now I can just kind of do character strengths. It's easy. And unfortunately, we don't dig deep enough as educators into the real nuance of a theory or an approach or a tool. So one of the lessons we've learned is that professional learning at its best is amazing at opening teachers' eyes, but there is a real trap There's a real trap that we take professional learning or professional development opportunities as, as a comprehensive approach. It's not. It never will be comprehensive. It will always be highly superficial. And therefore, it's your role as an educator to take that inspiration, if it inspires you, and to dig deeply, to take this tool to really think deeply about how it can refine your craft and to work at it. Go and read more books, watch more TED Talks, practice, talk to other educators and colleagues about this particular thing. But understand that even at its best, professional learning can only ever be a superficial inspiration. It is not a comprehensive learning experience for educators. Jared?
And what we start to learn from here is you can probably tell we're building to a point that where we're going to start to recognize that it's all going to come back down to us at some level. If we're listening to the TED Talks, yeah, we're going to get a great nugget, but we're never going to get down to the truth. Now, next theory, everyone says, well, cool, go read the research. Dude, I'm a scientist and I don't even have time to read the research half the time. So I doubt teachers do. That's not top of your thing. So the answer here isn't going to be take the nugget, then go do a deep dive into the academic lit and figure out the effect sizes. And yet, no, the secret somehow is going to come back to us to say, cool, great idea. Now let's see what the heck happens in my context, what's going on with me. So we're digging to a point with all of this. But for now, let's just pull it back and go, okay, specifically with mindset, has this thing been represented accurately? I'll just tell you a quick story. So I used to work with Howard Gardner, multiple intelligences guy, back in Boston. And first time I ever talked to him, he said, I've stepped into his room. He didn't know me from Adam. I was just there to get a signature because I needed to switch classes. And he goes, if you're here to talk to me about mindset, you can turn around and leave now. I don't talk about it anymore. And I'm like, I wasn't, but why? Now you got me intrigued. And he explained that everything he said was so misinterpreted and he tried his hardest for a decade to get people to see that's not what I meant, that he's just quit trying now.
I think, Jared,
if you go back and read, I
think you said mindset. So when he said he's not going to talk about multiple intelligences.
Yeah, my bad. I'm sorry about that. But the multiple intelligences, Gardner. And that's why, so he just stopped trying. He's like, I can't win this battle. It is out of my hands now. I'm done. And if you read his original work, the way we tend to think about it now isn't anywhere close to the kind of arguments he was actually trying to make. So that's a great example of misinterpretation. Now, recently, and I mean within the last year, Carol Dweck has made the same argument. Mindset has been misinterpreted. Y'all don't know what it was I was trying to say. Is that accurate? And let's see if Miss Carol Dweck has truly been misinterpreted. Which of these has she said? Mindset has profound impact on student learning? Yes, she said that. Mindset is more important than cognitive factors for academic performance. Yes, she has said that. Mindset plays a key role in scientific achievement. Yes, she has said that. Mindset can advance peace between the Israelis and Palestinians in the Middle East. Yes, she has said that. It is real hard to argue that something has been misinterpreted when the inventor of that thing herself says this is more important than cognitive factors when it comes to learning. That mindset is more important than working memory size, than attention duration. The point we're trying to make, and I'm not trying to dog this is what we mean by interrogating these things and starting to dig down and start to see that when the whole world took mindset and went running with it, Dweck went with them. When people started saying, when she was talking about errors and people said, oh, it must help learning, she said, yeah, it must. And then when she saw correlations and people said it must be causative, she said, yeah, it must. Never once until recently did she stop and say, wait a second, that's not what I meant. And lo and behold, that is exactly what she meant. We're now just getting data to show that it's not the story she's been telling. So if you've been taking in, this is the issue with TEDx talk types of PL. It gives us great ideas, but at that point, we now need to do something else with it. We cannot take any of that stuff at face value, especially within our contexts, which brings us to our third and final point.
It's here. Here's the third one. And I don't know if you can guess what it is, but it's here that the teacher matters a lot. In fact, I nearly wrote this as the teacher matters more than you even think. If you think the teacher matters a lot, they matter more than that even. And what we've seen in positive education, wellbeing science, is some fascinating data in 2014 that are still so weird, not weird, but really profound. If you go into your school or any school in the world and you get a group of 10th grade kids, a group of 15-year-old kids, and you ask them, how much do you enjoy or value geography or history or learning science or studying Japanese or whatever it is, you end up with a bell curve, a normal distribution. Most students say, yeah, learning Japanese is okay. Some of them love it. Some of them hate it, but most are in the middle somewhere. We get a normal distribution, right? Which is what you would expect. In 2014, some researchers from the University of Melbourne came to Geelong Grammar School, interviewed some of our 10th grade students about positive education, wellbeing science lessons, asked the same question, how much do you enjoy or value your wellbeing lessons? And we got this data back, which was this kind of U-shaped inverted graph, exactly opposite of the data you might expect to see. What this showed is that some students hated their wellbeing lessons, or half the students hated them. Half the students loved their wellbeing lessons. These lessons are exactly the same. They're tightly controlled kind of lesson plans. There was no kind of variability at all. So we couldn't really understand what could cause this data until we recognized that the students on the left side of the graph there, they all had the same couple of teachers. The students on the right side of the graph, they all had the same couple of teachers. What we found with wellbeing science is actually the curriculum kind of has almost no impact at all. It doesn't really matter how good or bad it is. What really matters is the teacher. The teacher is almost the only variable in this teaching of wellbeing science. That if you care about, if you have a great relationship with kids, if they trust you, if there's integrity and kindness and connection, they enjoy it. If you don't, if you're rubbish at your job, if you can't connect with kids, doesn't matter how good the curriculum is, they're going to hate it. So we learned this lesson very hard. We didn't realize how important this was. And then, interestingly, Jared, we saw a very similar kind of finding in mindset theory as well.
So go back to Dweck's original data, where we're just looking at the impact of incremental theory of intelligence, growth mindset on dealing with errors. Take grades, take everything off the table. How do kids respond to errors? Her initial data says, if you have a growth mindset and you make an error, you stick with it longer. If you have a fixed, you're faster to dump out. Cool. In 2019, somebody did a massive replication of that study in a different context. In this case, they used schools in China. Exact same study, far more numbers, far more kids. And what happened? Absolutely no impact. They came out and said, there's nothing significant we ever found here. All that mindset stuff that we tried, we mirrored your thing exactly. We got no impact over here. And in fact, on some kids, we saw flipped. Why weren't they able to replicate it? Here's where we get to our big point, where we start to recognize teachers matter and context matters just as much. Everything we learn about the science of learning, about how human beings learn, about how things move, whenever anyone tries to put that together and say, now here's a recipe for how you should go teach, it will always fall flat. It will work some of the times in some contexts. It won't work a lot more of the times in a lot more of the contexts. This is why that one size doesn't fit all. This is why, and I love them to death, but the Marzanos of the world, the Haddies of the world, the cultures of thinking of the world, they come out with these, do these 10 things, don't do these. Dunlosky, here's your toolkit, avoid these 15 things over here. These are all wonderful in a fixed laboratory when we are under heavily controlled conditions. As soon as we hit the realm of the real world, context matters enough to start to flip it. Things that were good in a lab become horrible. Things that didn't work in a lab become great. Which means at the end of the day, whether or not any of this stuff will ever work for us, including mindset, boils down to what are we going to do with it on our ground and our context with our students. And this is where we start to see that it swings back to us.
And this is where we get to, two things I want to say before I hand back to you, Jared. One is that about mindset. That mindset is a really important theory for us to understand. We are not suggesting that mindset is a completely flawed waste of time. We should understand mindset because of this. A fixed mindset in a child is about as big a disaster as you can have in education. If you've got a child, and we've all experienced it as educators, if you've got a child in your class who doesn't believe that they can get better at maths or music or science, if they think that their parents were dumb at maths and therefore they've got dumb maths genes and therefore there's no point studying maths, that's a disaster for educative outcomes. So a fixed mindset is a real thing and it's a real problem, and we've got to work hard to eradicate fixed mindset. Secondly, we have to appreciate that in every classroom, in every context, in every setting is different and unique. And that we have to be, if we're going to be prepared as professionals to get better every day, we've got to experiment. We've got to try new things. And this is where our concept of skunk works is kind of our solution to, it's a kind of a counterpunch or a counterpoint to wanting systemic change. Like a lot of educators say, David Jarrett, look, it's no point. Like, I know what you're saying, it's nice and stuff, but the system's broken. We've got to impact governments and stuff. We've got to change the system, and then maybe we can get better schools and stuff. Our argument is, no, that's not true. In fact, it's entirely wrong. And we believe kind of the exact opposite. And this is where skunk works. Jared, I'd love for you to just share this concept.
Yeah, done. And I'll come in. And skunk works says this. It's this concept that we've got to do our own research, our own evidence gathering, our own work, our own documentation on our own ground. We've got to start forming small little groups of people that together we're going to say, you know what, let's try something. The 6 of us, let's just try something new this week. Let's do 1 week where none of us let our kids take notes, and let's see what happens to the engagement, to the number of questions they ask, to the vibe in our room, to the relationships we're forming. And you know what? This other group over here of 10 people, maybe next week what we're going to do, you know what, let's try something new. I got this idea of mindset. Why don't we start each class with a 5-minute mindset intervention? Let's see what happens. Skunkworks says on the ground, we're running just these little small scale things with our small elite group. The idea being that if what we've done fails and a week later we see that not taking notes has led to absolute anarchy and kids are setting desks on fire, sweet. We didn't just blow out the entire education system. We just had 1 week in our room and we can ditch it. No cost, no harm, no foul. Everyone's back to normal. Whereas if we tried that same thing with everyone at the same time, that's what mindset and all these computer interventions, they try and scale them before they know what's happening on the ground. So if you do small skunk works thing and we get some bad data, cool, we leave it. But every once in a while, we're going to get some good evidence. We're going to say, dang, this seems to be working over here. Then we start to scale it small. Hey, let's bring in a couple of our other friends. Guys, you try this. See what you think. Now we can start to scale it a bit more. Hey, school, we've been working. We've got our little evidence. Here's what we think is going to happen. Can we try this on a broader school level? Works there? Let's try this on a district level. Works there? Let's try this on a higher level. Right now, everyone talks about changing education from the top down. And I got a big shocker for you. Ain't going to happen. The government has no impetus, no need, no desire to change anything from the top down unless the OECD says, here's a new curriculum and Scotland and Wales have to go, thanks for that nonsense. So it will change when there's money involved. Other than that, it ain't going anywhere. If we want to see these changes, it becomes grassroots. It becomes us saying, hey, Carol Dweck, thanks. David, thanks. Jared, thanks. I'll take that. And now I'm going to use my expertise and I'm going to go play. And if I find something interesting, I'm going to start sharing it and we're going to start building this stuff together. So this is where our big concept and where the end of the book kind of tails out, where we say, now as teachers, we get to do our job. And so often our job is just filling out things and ticking boxes and doing all this other stuff. If we can carve out that 10, 20% every week to just run our own baby skunks work and say, you know what, I'm going to try something. And if it works, cool, I'm going to tell a friend. And that's how we start to spin things until you've got 50 schools in a district all trying something. And then the government has to listen. Why? Because we've already done all the work. And when the government says, great job, they'll take the credit for it. Oh, no one will ever give us credit for anything, but at least we'll now make a broader change past there. That's how we get to scale. So I hope that all kind of makes sense. What are you thinking, David?
I love it. And I think if anyone wants to know more about our view on skunkworks, it is in the outro. It's kind of our conclusion of our book. And so I love it. And I think we can do that. I think it's such a powerful message for teachers that we can stand up and be counted and make a difference. So thank you. And just respond to Bart's comments, some great comments, by the way. Thank you. I hope, Bart, that we've resolved your comment about teachers need to become better at their craft. They need to want to learn and how that fits with mindset. Absolutely. Yeah, teachers need a growth mindset. Of course, as do their students, we need to be role modeling growth mindset. But for mindset's sake, not in order to improve grades, I think is the solution there. Yeah, keep in touch. We've also got some very cool new, can't say too much, but some programs, some really exciting other stuff coming off the book, some opportunities to engage much more deeply with you guys. So keep in touch, keep an eye out for more 10 things schools get wrong, concepts and opportunities to engage. And we love that you've been involved. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be in touch. Paul, there was a little comment you saw. I'll write back to you independently if that's okay. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time and stay well, stay safe. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.